world's still the same. It's just less in it.
For decades, Johnny Depp was Hollywood's most mysterious superstar, a man who could disappear into any character, transform himself completely, and make the world believe every version of him. To fans, he was the charming rebel, the misunderstood artist, the unpredictable genius who lived life on his own terms. But behind the fame, behind the red carpets, and behind the unforgettable roles, there was something else, a hidden existence that even his closest friends never fully understood. For 30 years, Depp carried two lives, one that the cameras adored, and another that remained carefully sealed away from the public eye. A private world filled with unexpected habits, emotional struggles, and secret routines that shaped who he became as an artist and as a man. While tabloids created their own stories, none of them came close to the truth. And now, the real story of this double life is finally emerging. This hidden reality explains the choices he made, the people he trusted, and the battles he fought. It reveals the side of Johnny Depp that never walked red carpets, never gave interviews, and never played a character. A version of himself he protected fiercely. Until now. So, what was Depp hiding for all those years? Why did he live a life divided in two? And how did he manage to keep this secret for 3 decades without the world catching on? Let's uncover the truth behind the double life no one knew existed. From the very beginning of his rise to fame, Johnny Depp felt the weight of something he never expected, the loss of his own identity. Hollywood embraced him as the unpredictable heartthrob, the eccentric artist, and the man who could play anyone but himself. Directors admired his talent, fans adored his charm, and studios depended on his ability to turn any character into something unforgettable. But for Depp, fame quickly became a mask, one he wore more often than his own face. And this is where his secret double life began. As his career exploded in the late 1980s and early 1990s, Depp built a very intentional wall between the public figure and the private man. The world saw the actor, the man who transformed into Jack Sparrow, Edward Scissorhands, and countless others. But behind closed doors, he guarded a quieter, deeply personal existence that almost no one ever saw. This second life wasn't glamorous, wild, or scandalous. It was the opposite. It was a refuge, a sanctuary where he could step away from the noise and demands of fame. And for 30 years, he protected it with incredible discipline. This hidden life was born from necessity. Depp's early years were marked by instability, constant moving, and emotional turbulence. Fame added pressure he wasn't prepared for, the kind that eats at a person's sense of control. So he created a private world he could escape into any time the spotlight grew too intense. In this world, he surrounded himself with books, music, art, and long, quiet nights that grounded him. It was the life of a man searching for peace, not applause. But keeping two identities alive wasn't easy. In interviews, Depp often seemed distant or evasive, not because he didn't care, but because he was protecting the version of himself the world wasn't allowed to see. Friends later admitted they sensed he was always holding something back. What they didn't know was that he had learned to separate his emotions so deeply that even people close to him rarely understood what he was carrying inside. The more famous he became, the more necessary the separation was. Paparazzi followed him everywhere, rumors swirled constantly, and every relationship he had became a media obsession. This made him retreat even further into his hidden life. When the world thought he was partying or living freely, he was often somewhere quiet, disconnected, and alone, recharging the parts of himself that fame constantly drained. What made this double life even more astonishing was how consistently and carefully he kept it hidden. There were no leaks, no accidental reveals, no interviews where he let something slip. He built a system around himself, trusted assistants, private routines, secret locations, all designed to protect the life the public never saw. And he maintained this system flawlessly for 3 decades. People often wondered how Depp managed to stay so unpredictable in his roles. The answer was simple. His hidden world kept him grounded, creative, and connected to the emotions he poured into his characters. It was a safe space that allowed him to explore thoughts and experiences he could never express publicly. But living like this came with consequences. Holding 2 identities meant constant emotional balancing. It demanded silence when he wanted to speak, restraint when he wanted to break, and strength when he felt overwhelmed. And eventually, the stress of carrying this double existence would collide with the challenges erupting in his public life. Yet, even through the controversies, trials, and media storms, his private world remained untouched, a testament to how deeply he valued it. Because for Johnny Depp, the double life wasn't a secret to hide. It was a lifeline. As Johnny Depp's fame reached unimaginable heights, maintaining his hidden life became more than a quiet escape. It became a necessity for survival. The world saw an actor who could transform into anyone, but they never saw the emotional exhaustion that came with constantly shifting identities. Every role demanded a new version of him. Every movie required him to dive deeply into the minds of characters far darker, stranger, and more damaged than most actors dared to explore. And when he returned home, he often struggled to shake off the residue those characters left behind. This was where his second life stepped in, the life he guarded fiercely, the life that allowed him to breathe again. This private world was not one of luxury or Hollywood extravagance. It was rooted in something much simpler: quiet, routine, and anonymity. Depp would often retreat to remote spots far away from the cameras, places where he wasn't a celebrity, where nobody asked for photos, and where he could walk freely without feeling watched. He surrounded himself with books, old records, handwritten journals, and the kind of art that reminded him of who he was before the world knew his name. These were the tools that helped him reconnect with reality when the demands of fame threatened to erase it. People who visited him in these quiet spaces described a completely different Johnny: soft-spoken, introspective, almost shy. There were no fancy suits, no rehearsed interviews, no glare of studio lights. Just a man trying to hold on to the pieces of himself that the world constantly tried to take. His private world was a space where he didn't need to perform, where he didn't have to smile on command, and where he didn't feel the pressure of being Hollywood's most unpredictable superstar. But the contrast between these two lives grew sharper as his career skyrocketed. Publicly, Depp became known for eccentric characters, unusual choices, and a lifestyle the media couldn't stop speculating about. Every rumor became a headline, every photo became a story, and every move he made was exaggerated into something bigger. What people didn't realize was that many of these wild stories were simply inaccurate projections created by a media desperate to explain the parts of him they could never access. During this time, Depp leaned harder into his hidden life. He became more private, more reserved, more defensive of the few spaces that allowed him to exist without judgment. Friends later admitted that they rarely knew where he disappeared to or what he did during those quiet stretches away from Hollywood. It wasn't secrecy out of guilt, it was self-preservation. He wasn't hiding from the world because he wanted to deceive it. He was protecting the only version of himself that felt real. And yet, despite his efforts, the pressure of living two lives began to take a toll. Balancing the intense demands of fame with the emotional vulnerability of his private self required a level of discipline few could imagine. The emotional strain of carrying both identities silently began to bleed into his relationships, his decisions, and even his performances. The media called it unpredictability. His friends called it burnout. But Depp knew exactly what it was: the cost of holding together two worlds that were never meant to coexist. Still, he refused to give up his hidden life. It was the only place where he could heal, recharge, and remember why he started acting in the first place. Without it, the pressures of fame would have consumed him long ago. And though few people ever understood the full extent of his emotional struggle, those close to him noticed something else. His private life didn't weaken him. It sustained him. It kept him human. Johnny Depp's life appeared to be divided between two very different worlds. But the real complexity wasn't only in his career or relationships. It was in the secret emotional battles he waged behind the scenes. Battles that even those closest to him couldn't fully understand. While the public saw a charismatic actor who effortlessly delivered unforgettable performances, the truth was that Depp often struggled with a feeling he couldn't escape. A strange sense that he was living in someone else's skin. This haunting disconnect wasn't just a personal crisis. It shaped how he behaved, how he loved, and how he created art, and it quietly fueled the double life he carried for decades. Those who worked with Depp repeatedly described him as a man who switched personas the moment the camera stopped rolling. One minute he would be joking, animated, and full of life, and the next he'd fall completely silent, almost disappearing into himself. Directors often mistook this for preparation or deep focus, but friends later reveled that it was something far more troubling. Depp had built an emotional maze inside his mind, a place where he could hide the parts of himself he didn't want the world to see. He slipped into that maze whenever the real world felt too heavy. And as the years went on, he found himself spending more time inside it than outside. This unusual habit started long before he became a global icon. As a teenager, Depp was known as the quiet dreamer who never quite fit in. He bounced between passions, music, art, acting, never fully committing because he didn't feel connected to any single version of himself. Fame only amplified that confusion. Suddenly, the world expected him to be one thing, but he felt like several different people living inside the same body. To cope, he crafted a system that allowed him to disappear emotionally while still functioning physically. It became his survival mechanism, one that stayed with him long after he became a household name. The film sets where Depp worked became the perfect environment for this hidden routine. Surrounded by costumes, makeup, and fictional worlds, he found it easy to slip away from his real identity. Playing a character wasn't just a job, it was an escape hatch. Every role offered him a temporary refuge from his internal struggles. But what no one realized was that Depp sometimes stayed in character long after filming stopped, blending his real personality with fictional ones until even he couldn't distinguish between the two. This wasn't intentional or theatrical. It was a quiet symptom of a deeper emotional fracture. One of the most surprising examples came from those who worked with him during the early 2000s. Crew members claimed that Depp occasionally arrived on set, speaking with an accent from a role he had played years earlier. At first, people thought he was being playful, but as the weeks went by, they noticed he often didn't break the accent even in private moments. His friends later admitted that this wasn't a joke. It was a sign that Depp sometimes defaulted to whichever version of himself felt safest at the time. The double life he was living wasn't about secrets or scandals. It was about identity, confusion, and the pressure of carrying so many emotional layers at once. The public saw signs but didn't recognize them for what they were. Depp's constantly shifting looks, his unpredictable interviews, his unusual artistic choices, these weren't just quirks. They were subtle clues that he was navigating a complicated internal world. Even his closest relationships reflected this duality. Friends described him as incredibly loving and generous one moment and distant the next, as if he were being pulled between two realities. It wasn't coldness or disinterest, it was exhaustion from maintaining separate emotional lives. What made his double life even more compelling was how successful he was at hiding it. For nearly 30 years, Depp perfected the art of presenting only what he wanted people to see. He mastered charm when charm was needed, vulnerability when vulnerability felt safer, and silence when silence protected him the most. By the time the truth became clearer, the double life had already shaped every part of his journey, his relationships, his career, and even his sense of self. This hidden emotional world wasn't a scandal, it was a quiet storm he carried alone. And the full weight of it wouldn't be revealed until much later, when pieces of his past finally came together in ways no one expected. As the years moved forward, the truth about Johnny Depp's double life began to surface not through official statements or interviews, but through small, revealing moments that slipped through the cracks. The world watched him walk through red carpets, courtroom doors, film sets, and hotel lobbies, unaware that he was carrying a silent burden that had followed him since his youth. But eventually, patterns began to form, and the people closest to him started to understand that Depp wasn't simply unpredictable. He was fighting a private internal battle that had shaped every corner of his life. It wasn't fame that complicated his world. It was the pressure to keep certain emotions locked away. Those who became close to Depp noticed a strange rhythm in his life where he moved between warmth and withdrawal, creativity and quietness, confidence and self-doubt. Sometimes he appeared deeply present, sharing stories or making people laugh. And then suddenly he'd disappear into solitude, even in a crowded room. Friends called it his vanishing switch, a moment where he would mentally check out and slip into a private space he rarely discussed. For years, people assumed it was the temperament of an artist. But with time, the truth became harder to ignore. The emotional duality that shaped his life became most evident in his relationships. Those closest to him spoke of a man who loved intensely but struggled to remain connected. Depp wasn't cold or distant by nature. He was simply torn between the identity he presented to the world and the quieter, more fragile version he protected. When things became overwhelming, he retreated into that hidden internal world where he felt safe. But this retreat often came at the cost of the relationships he valued the most. Loved ones were left wondering why he would suddenly pull away, unaware that he was battling an overwhelming need to escape before the pressure broke him. His career also reflected this hidden world. Depp gravitated toward roles that mirrored the complexity he carried inside characters who felt misunderstood, fragmented, or lost. He wasn't just acting. He was expressing pieces of himself in ways he couldn't in real life. Every eccentric performance, every emotional monologue, every strange mannerism wasn't just artistic choice, it was a release valve for the emotions he kept buried. Directors began to notice how deeply he connected with these roles, often disappearing into them with an intensity that blurred the line between actor and character. It became clear that acting wasn't just a profession for Johnny, it was therapy, escape, and self-preservation wrapped into one. But the most revealing element of his double life emerged much later, when the world began paying closer attention to the emotional toll fame had taken on him. Interviews that once seemed quirky were rewatched with new eyes. People noticed moments where he drifted off mid-sentence, as if pulled into memories he refused to share. They noticed how often he deflected personal questions with humor, or how his expression changed when topics became too close to the truth. The double life he'd kept hidden was finally becoming visible, not because he confessed it, but because the years had worn down the walls he built around it. Despite all of this, what made Depp's journey so compelling wasn't the struggle itself, it was his resilience. Even when he felt fractured internally, he continued creating some of the most memorable characters in modern cinema. Even when he retreated emotionally, he found ways to express himself through music, art, and storytelling. And even when the world misunderstood him, he kept pushing forward, carrying the weight of his complexities with quiet strength. His double life wasn't a scandalous secret. It was a shield he built to survive the pressures of fame, expectations, and internal chaos. What truly shocked fans was the realization that the man they'd watched for decades was not simply mysterious, he was navigating emotional storms that few people knew existed. The double life he lived was never about deception. It was about survival. It was about finding pockets of peace in a world that demanded too much from him. It was about balancing the person he truly was with the person the world expected him to be. And now, as the truth comes into focus, people are seeing Johnny Depp with new understanding. Not as a flawless icon, nor as a troubled star, but as a complex human being who carried hidden battles for over 30 years. His double life wasn't exposed through scandal or confession. It was revealed through time, resilience, and the quiet clues he left behind along the way.